How do you found General Motors, get pushed out of it by your own board, build an entirely new car company for the sole purpose of buying your old one back, succeed, lose everything a second time, and still end up broke, running a bowling alley 3 miles from the empire you built? That's not a hypothetical. That's just the life of William Crapo Durant. Durant didn't come from money, exactly, though his grandfather had once been governor of Michigan. He dropped out of high school and went to work at his grandfather's lumberyard in Flint. By his mid-20s, he'd talked his way into the horse-drawn carriage business, and by 1890, the company he co-founded, Durant Dort, was the largest carriage manufacturer in the entire country, building 50,000 vehicles a year. Durant had a genuine gift, not for engineering, but for building organizations and selling belief. In 1904, a struggling Michigan automaker called Buick convinced Durant to take it over. Within a couple of years, he'd turned it into one of the best-selling car brands in America. And in 1908, with that success behind him, Durant founded General Motors, in Flint, with the idea of buying up as many small automakers as he could, and combining them under one roof. He moved fast, acquiring Oldsmobile, Cadillac, Oakland, which would later become Pontiac, and roughly 20 other companies within just a couple of years. He reportedly even tried to buy Ford outright, but Henry Ford wanted more cash up front than Durant could raise at the time. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary run. It was also completely unsustainable. By 1910, Durant had overextended GM so badly, buying companies faster than the business could absorb them, that the whole thing nearly collapsed during an economic downturn. A group of bankers agreed to bail GM out with a $15 million loan, but only on the condition that Durant stepped down as president. For the first time, but not the last, William Durant lost control of the company he'd founded. Most people, having just lost their own company, might take some time to regroup. Durant took 6 weeks. He partnered with a former Buick racing driver named Louis Chevrolet, and together they founded the Chevrolet Motor Company in November of 1911. According to Chevrolet's own recollection, Durant simply told him, quote, "We're going to need a car," so he built one. Chevrolet sold well enough that Durant quietly began using its rapidly rising stock value to buy up shares of General Motors, the company that had pushed him out 5 years earlier. It was, essentially, a hostile takeover of his own former company, executed patiently and almost invisibly, share by share. By 1916, he'd accumulated enough. Durant offered GM shareholders 5 shares of Chevrolet stock for every single share of GM stock they held, and offered generous enough that stockholders lined up to take it. By 1918, the deal was complete. Chevrolet had effectively absorbed General Motors, and William Durant, the man the bankers had removed just 8 years earlier, was back in charge of the company he'd started. It's one of the more remarkable comebacks in American business history. It also didn't last. Under Durant's second term, GM grew enormously, roughly 8 times larger within just 4 years. But Durant was, once again, overextending, this time personally, buying huge amounts of GM stock on margin, borrowed money used to buy more stock, betting on the company's continued rise. Then, in 1920, the post-war economic boom ended abruptly. Stocks lost a quarter of their value almost overnight. 100,000 American businesses went bankrupt. Durant, reportedly feeling personally responsible for the thousands of ordinary stockholders who'd trusted him with their savings, kept buying GM stock anyway, trying to prop up its price out of his own pocket. Within 6 months, his personal fortune, roughly $90 million, was completely gone. He was bailed out one more time, this time by the DuPont family, who had been quietly buying GM stock of their own for years. Pierre DuPont agreed to pay off Durant's debts on one condition, that Durant resign from General Motors completely, permanently, no path back this time. Durant was 59 years old, and for the second time in his life, unemployed, having twice built and lost control of what would become the largest corporation in the world. He still didn't stop. Within weeks, Durant founded a new company under his own name, Durant Motors, and spent the 1920s building cars again while also becoming one of the most aggressive stock speculators on Wall Street, earning the nickname the Bull of the Bulls. His personal fortune, at its peak during this period, has been estimated at close to $1 billion. Then came 1929. The crash wiped out nearly everything he had left. Durant Motors limped along for a few more years before finally being liquidated in 1933. Durant himself formally declared personal bankruptcy in the mid-1930s, the man who had once controlled the largest car company on earth, now with essentially nothing. In 1940, at nearly 80 years old, Durant opened a bowling alley in Flint, Michigan, called the North Flint Recreation Center, built in the literal shadow of Buick City, the massive GM manufacturing complex still bearing his early fingerprints. He reportedly had plans to expand it into a nationwide chain. By most accounts, he still had the same restless energy and big ideas he'd always had. People who knew him at the time say he was already talking about concepts like drive-in restaurants and home refrigeration years before either became common. But in 1942, Durant suffered a stroke that left him largely incapacitated, ending those plans for good. William Crapo Durant died in his New York apartment in March of 1947, at 85 years old. Other major figures in American business, some of them people he'd competed with or lost to decades earlier, were reportedly covering parts of his final expenses. He's buried in his own mausoleum in the Bronx. Drive north from Detroit today, about 60 miles up to Flint, and you'll find markers and a statue commemorating William Durant. Back in Detroit, at the old General Motors headquarters, his initials are still carved into the building's stonework, faded now, barely visible from the street, a quiet, easy-to-miss trace of the man who built the whole thing twice and still somehow ended up running a bowling alley down the road. Do you think Durant's downfall came from bad luck, twice hitting economic crashes at exactly the wrong moment? Or was it simply the same restless, all-in instinct that built General Motors in the first place, eventually catching up with him? Let me know what you think in the comments.